All right, we're going to get started here. We're right at the top of the hour. Welcome again to the very first episode of Savas Skillshare, Planning an Enterprise Level Website Redesign. We've got a panel discussion here that we're really excited to talk through here today, share some experience with you. So let's get started. First, what are Savas Skillshares? So here at Savas Labs, listening, learning, and sharing are core to the way that we work together and communicate amongst our team and with our partners. We routinely run Skillshares amongst our team members, and now we want to share the same with you. So Savas Skillshares provides a platform for experts at Savas Labs to share valuable knowledge and expertise to help others learn about new technologies and tactics to support their organizations, understand the processes and pitfalls within implementing them, and ultimately to build a network of like-minded professionals looking to make an impact using technology. So what are we going to be covering here today? Well, we're going to be covering why planning is so important for our website redesign. We're going to walk through the key planning considerations that we've learned about through dozens of enterprise website redesigns. And we're going to answer your questions about maybe your website redesign that you have upcoming and give you some skills and tools to help you build a sound plan that you can take to an agency partner as you get started. So you might be wondering, well, who are these people who are sharing this information and why should we care? So Savas Labs is a highly skilled team of designers, developers, and consultants that build digital products that create meaningful impact. We're an agency based out of Raleigh, North Carolina, but we're distributed throughout the United States. And we absolutely love talking about any sort of digital work that affects change for organizations and for the people that they serve. So speaking of the people that love to do that, here is the group that's going to be talking here today. Ian Curran is the Director of Design at Savas Labs. With over 13 years of experience in the creative industry, Ian brings with him a wealth of both UX strategy and UI design expertise. His focus is centered around growth-driven design and ensuring that the digital solutions created drive bottom-line results. Ian's background includes running his own design studio for a decade and building high-performing design departments within a fast-paced agency environment. His strengths lie in collaboration and leading teams forward to solve complex problems using creativity and out-of-the-box solutions. Ian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And myself, I'm Mark Hirschberger. I'm the growth director here at Savas Labs, and I'll be just emceeing this panel discussion here today, pulling all that good information out of Ian. So a little bit about what today is going to look like. We're going to spend a bit of time learning about the Savas Labs design approach, give you an understanding of how we built some of this expertise up and how we utilize it. But we're going to go, for the most part, into just the meat of today's Skillshare. We're going to step through the different areas that you should be considering for your website redesign. We're going to share a lot of really, really helpful tips that we've learned throughout the years. We are going to be setting aside some time at the end for audience Q&A. So if you have any questions on your side that you would love to get an answer for, feel free to share that in the questions and answers section here in Zoom. You can do that now if you came in and you have some very specific things you want to learn, or throw them in there as we start covering different topics. We are going to save and batch them all for the end, so just know that we'll be getting to it at that time. We'll wrap everything up though with a few resources and a few notes to help you take what you learned here today and put that into action, and that'll be that. So with that said, I'm going to hand things over to Ian. Feel free to just tell us a little bit more about the Savas Labs design team, what you all do, who you're working with, and all that fun stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. So here at Savas, our team's comprised of user experience strategists and designers, as well as product and interface designers. As a department and a company, we create those products and websites that are centered around usability as well as accessibility, and always looking to have that future consideration and ability to scale with your company as you grow. Within our department, there's two different ethos that we like to focus on. One of them is always staying curious. And thinking about that, as we go through this website redesign process, we're always looking to find solutions to the right problem and not necessarily the problem that is most obvious or that the client immediately brings to our attention. The second one being, we are transformative. We build and allow our clients to truly break through within their industry. And it's something that we look to be both the catalyst for and implementers to make sure that we realize that brand vision for our clients. As far as those said clients that we do work with, we work with some of the biggest clients or brands within the country. one of them being Duke University on over into Environmental Defense Fund, as well as Sazerac. Through this experience, getting to work with these amazing clients, we've developed these necessary skills to become that navigator for your company to run through these projects that can feel daunting and lend our expertise to tackle these enterprise level website redesign projects. So without further ado, I'm excited to jump into things and share what we've got for you today.
Okay, great. So Ian, you're well aware of this, but we're going to set the stage for the rest of our audience here today. When it comes to planning for a website redesign, one of the very first things that you're going to want to get nailed down and really set in stone is your goals and objectives. Clarifying those is the starting point, and that's the foundation for almost all the other decisions that you're going to make throughout this process. So from your experience, what are some of the main reasons why people decide to redesign an existing website? And really, why is it so important to understand which bucket you might fall into out of those reasons?
Sure. Basically, I like to put these things into two main buckets there. The first one being current technology or tech stack within your website is just outdated and or the design needs that facelift. So that's the first bucket. In that second bucket falls, business objectives have either pivoted and changed or performance is just falling short of expectations. So it's time to reinvent ourselves and go through this website redesign process. Now, in those two considerations, why that's important is really we can understand, are we tearing things down and starting from the beginning in the case that your tech stack does not quite live up or is outdated? So in those circumstances, we know that there's going to be a lot of bandwidth on the development team and tons of discovery there on what is the right or correct path forward. How do we choose those things? And really what it is that we're looking to accomplish. So heavy on the discovery side to really dictate what those things are, and then bringing in that design team to really design around some of those solutions. Now, on the other side, that's pertaining to goals, pivoting or changing from a business perspective or conversion optimization, something like that, where we're really looking for a performance boost. In those buckets, it's all about that strategy phase. How can we lay out the roadmap in which we can understand how we're going to define success and then measure against that success there. So those are kind of the two buckets I like to put people in initially.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good thing to point out just early on in here, right? Is that there are things outside of just needing a facelift that are going to drive some of these decisions, and that's going to really help you better understand, why do I want to achieve some of these things, and what am I going to start looking at? So Ian, one of the things that I've heard you start a lot of conversations with clients on in the past is just a simple question of what does success look like? Can you explain to our audience why you ask that and what you're looking to gather from the client with that question?
Sure. First and foremost, it's, do we have a clear direction to start moving forward? Everything starts obviously with that discovery phase, but without knowing where we're starting, it can turn into we're not even sure where to look. So that's the main reason why I like to ask that is, are you as a potential partner of ours already considering what that success looks like so that we can have that roadmap to at least begin forward movement? The next thing I like to understand with asking that question is a twofold thing. This allows us as an agency to vet and decide if our expertise is the absolute right fit for your company, and vice versa. By having a clear understanding of what success looks like, you can evaluate your potential partner based on their skills and expertise. Maybe that is a tech stack or a very particular design sensibility that you're looking for. So by having more of that clear direction around what success is, that helps you find the best partner. And then lastly, within this topic, having a clear direction also goes into the thing that everybody asks about, budgets and timeline. So unless we know what we're building or what we're solving for, it can be very, very hard to go down into the granular detail of maybe we need user testing or user research, information architecture, all these different exercises and tools that we can run unless we have at least somewhat measure of success to work towards. We can't give that accurate budget and timeline.
So like you said, everybody's success is going to look a little bit different, sound a little bit different, be focused on different things. But, does that success for somebody have to be set in stone before starting a project?
Of course not. Like I said, it's just a jumping off point. So our approach here at Savas is taking a lot of that time up front in that sales process to get to know our customers and really understand what drove you to potentially make this huge investment within your website. So it's just a conversation piece that can really allow you to do the proper vetting and find the best fit for you, but in no ways set in stone.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, things are going to evolve as you learn more things, as you talk to stakeholders in more depth, which we're going to get to in a little bit. Reasons for redesigning the website can sometimes be subjective at best, right? So what should change agents on the call here today be doing to help them better understand maybe the pitfalls of their current state, right? Maybe their existing website, and clarify what any ideal state should focus on to drive the measurable results that they're looking to achieve?
Sure. For considerations there, we have to take into account both our internal users, being the company people that will be contributing to the website, as well as our external users or our audience that is coming to the website to, grab your product or service. And really understanding that behavior and how people are going to be interacting and engaging with your website, that can help you go from just feeling subjective of, we hate the way this looks and it's time for change. Well, let's get to the nitty gritty and understand why change is important. So starting there with both internal and external users is a good place to get that conversation going. The other big thing there is, are we making some incremental steps, or are we doing a complete 180 turn from what's currently online for this digital experience? And understanding that we can really do the same thing from that subjective to a objective pivot there of, are we looking for change for the sake of change, or what is that real direction we're looking to go towards? So those are the first two, and the one that we love the most is data. Are these goals and reasons for approaching a website redesign coming from some source of data, whether that's, SEO analytics or just site traffic, different things like this, where it's shaping your decisions to make whatever pivot needs to happen, such that, again, we're not just choosing new colors and updating photography and things like that.
Yeah, data is such a huge one for us, right? Because you can't argue with it, at least too much, right? So you talked about Google Analytics, pulling some of those things in there. I know that we've also pulled other tools in, like Hotjar, Lucky Orange is another one, right? Getting some heat maps and maybe even screen recordings. It's a big part of helping you really understand like where you should be spending your time and what you expect to get from it, huh?
Absolutely. And, at the end of the day, that allows us as creatives to design with intention. The end goal of design is a communication tool and not some art piece, even though some designers hate to hear those things. It's how do we breathe that strategy into design that really gives it its polish there.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, design's one part that you should be considering on this side, but, when it comes to maybe some more of the technical requirements to meet the objectives that you've lined out, what should, some website redesign owners be considering to ensure that they're covering their bases with, with the general plan?
That comes in a couple different buckets. What is the current system in place? When diving in and doing some of those audits, we have to understand what infrastructure is there, what are the bones, and are those bones, solid for us to build on top of. What ties also into that is just technical documentation. Oftentimes a big time suck for any team, whether it's internal or external, is that ramp up time of bringing in individuals to work on projects. If there's not a clear documentation there, then it can be very taxing on the timeline to get people up to speed and really contribute to those projects. So checking in with your development team before some of those conversations, because a salesperson is going to ask, what system is this website built on, and do you have any documentation? So just knowing that up front is a good place to start. The other big thing that ties onto that is what is your tech stack? What kind of platform integrations are we going to have to bring into the website? What's communicating with one another? That includes APIs and different things like that. So understanding that as well will really shape how robust and how heavy of a development lift these projects will take on, ultimately affecting that timeline and budget. Another big thing I like to have people already being considerate of is content generation. How is your team going to be using the back end of the website? That way we can make the correct CMS selection. Do you have a development team that's going to be making all these custom updates, different things like that? So keeping those things in mind from a technical standpoint, because those are very key to being able to suss out what it's going to take to do this website redesign.
Yeah, I mean, Ian, from everything that I'm hearing from you within this section of clarifying goals and objectives, a large part of it comes down to understanding where you currently are, whether that's the results that you're currently getting, the activities that are currently happening on your site, to the system that you have and how well you understand its current mapping and how the way in which people use it. Without that, it sounds like it's really hard to establish any sort of new idea of what everything should look like.
Yeah, I think that the big thing there is just awareness, making sure you do some due diligence on your side to understand how things are working and just overall have a good feel. That's what makes the most successful projects, is when we can really tap into you as a company for being the experts within whatever industry you work within, and let us do all that technical stuff, but at least having the awareness to know where to point us so we can do our thing.
Yeah. And I mean, once you have that awareness, right, that next stage is all about identifying your stakeholders and aligning with them on the vision that you have, maybe the vision that they might have, and ultimately getting that buy-in, right? That's a huge part. Websites do not get redesigned by one person, nor is there only one person in an organization who has an opinion on it. So stakeholder is a pretty broad term, especially when you're considering how many people actually can and will touch a website redesign. So could you maybe list out the different types of stakeholders that you believe should be considered and included throughout a redesign, and maybe include, how you think they should be involved?
Absolutely. So there's three main buckets there that I like to kind of identify to break that down and demystify what those key stakeholders are. The first one being the decision maker. This can be one individual that kind of oversees things, or a group of individuals, but ultimately it's super, super important that we identify that up front, such that in any circumstances of potential compromise or giving that final say, we know that there is someone that holds that power. The other big thing there as well is understanding and getting access to them, so that we're designing this website around their intentions and not just our perceived goals for this website process. So number one being the decision maker. And then the next one I like to really break out is the project lead or the day-to-day contact. Who is it that we're really going to be getting our hands dirty with and communicating back and forth and doing most of our collaboration time with? It's our job in this relationship to empower those project leads and day-to-day point of contact people to be able to relay that strategy and present those things to those decision makers to allow for them to make the best judgment there. We're not always going to have access as partners to those decision makers. And there's a lot of internal communication that happens behind the scenes as well. So empowering those people to, take that message up to the decision makers so that ultimately we come up with the best product. The last one on that list are the contributors. These can be, content generators, sales team, marketing team, all of those people that won't necessarily be super entwined in the overall process, but very important to the success of that project. How can we make sure that their considerations are there and their contributions are there such that we are designing both for the end user as well as the company goals and needs, which includes that internal interaction with the website as well. So those are the three buckets there. One of the things I do like to kind of talk about it's not necessarily a formal methodology, but it's one that is familiar to a lot of people, and that's that RACI model. The RACI model basically is who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be consulted, and who needs to be informed. So when we look at those things, we can really start to break that down into how much access do we need to, say, the decision maker? Are they more just consulted or informed? Are they just informed and get to review everything at the end? And then the responsible, accountable, that's those day-to-day project managers and project leads, as well as the contributors. So I like to frame it that way because it helps really understand when and where you need to make those touch points when considering that methodology.
Yeah, and even if maybe you throw RACI down, if you start using decision maker, lead, contributor, I feel like a lot of people, when they get into a project like this, they think that this is their project, right? Or they should be a part of a number of different areas of it. So what advice would you give someone who is looking to set expectations with these different types of stakeholders in terms of how they'll be involved in the process, maybe when they'll be pulled in, and how much time that they should be dedicating to doing whatever they need to?
Sure. I mean, the big thing is let's get everybody in the same room. You've got to kick off projects the right way and make sure all those stakeholders get on those meetings and get to air those things out and really create that united front to move forward. Now, once you get into the nitty-gritty of things, the biggest thing that's important is allowing people the amount of time that is needed and the visibility into those things, knowing they're coming down the pipeline. So that's the big thing with the decision-making aspect of this is let's make sure in advance, say a week in advance, we let them know that they need to set aside 6 hours. And I know that can be a big ask for some of those individuals, but if you allow them the appropriate planning time, then you're going to get the best results out of that. You're going to get appropriate feedback. You're going to get alignment and the ability to have some more of that two-way street instead of it being just a yes-no conversation, which can cause some big ripple effects down at the end if they're just being rushed and asking to move things forward because they don't want to be a bottleneck there. The other thing in thinking through that is just overall project management, visibility, and sticking to those timelines. So contributors know when they're going to be tapped, and we can schedule things like user testing and user interviews within this, and then have enough time to formulate those hypotheses to present to the client and give them that ample time for feedback.
Yeah. Having a clear understanding on your own, as you explained to somebody else, that this is going to take us so long. This is the role that you play. This is when we're going to pull you in. All really helpful to get that initial buy-in on everything, but also to set some really clear expectations on all that. It's incredibly important. I think one of the other things that's really interesting as we start to pull people in on the early stages of these redesigns is that, you have a potentially large group of stakeholders who are going to have differing opinions on, what a new website maybe needs or should look like.
Mhm.
How do you approach, clients to understand them and those different opinions while establishing or working to establish a singular vision of what should be approached?
Yeah, you just touched on it. Do we have that clearly defined vision and direction to move this project forward? Up until that point, there may be a few different competing objectives that need to be really hashed out. So allowing yourself that time to run those workshops is super, super important, because when you have, the people on the ground and the project leads and things like that in that same room with those decision makers, that's when we can really collaborate and make sure that the highest priority things are being addressed. That also kind of goes back to that we are curious. Make sure we're solving for that right problem based on the information you give us. We're your partner to really help you define those things. So don't be afraid to come to the table with ideas and lean on us to help define those and really give actionable steps forward such that everyone feels good about it. Because once everyone feels good about it, it's much easier to progress as you move forward. The other big thing there is consolidated feedback. So when we hand things over, even in those early stages, set that expectation with your internal team. We as partners will set that expectation with you as well, that yes, let's get everyone's opinions, but then let's get together internally and make one consolidated piece of feedback so that those items are actionable instead of conversation pieces and different things like that. There's nothing more frustrating on both sides of the table than a misinterpreted piece of feedback that if we thought it was clear and then you're handed something else, it's like, what were we doing? So understanding clear, actionable items within that consolidated feedback is imperative there.
So, it's getting buy-in from decision makers and maybe even the direction from them is one thing, right, for a new website. But who else do you need to be considering when it comes to getting buy-in from an internal team? And what about?
Sure. It's those contributors who's actually using this tool on a day-to-day basis. So understanding those roles and how they're interacting with that, you've got to come from a place of this project that I know there's going to be a learning curve and there's going to be things that are changing, but ultimately the goal here is to make it easier for you to do your job. So sitting down and taking into account, the sales and marketing team, who's creating this content as this website takes on a life of its own and starts to scale is super important there. So it's definitely not just appeasing the top level. We always look to, go top down and bottom up so that we're considering all things on the table as part of our solution.
Yeah. So finding those decision makers, understanding what they're looking for, getting them on the same page, obviously a big deal. But just like you just said, you have to consider the contributors as well. Make sure that you're building something that's going to solve for them. All really helpful for you to get ultimately buy-in from your team so that you can start moving forward towards, actually project planning this thing. And so that kind of brings up the next phase that I want to talk about, which is establishing a timeline and budget. A lot of people, when they're going into their first website redesign, ask about timelines for websites. And oftentimes we have to tell them that, it depends, right? So can you explain why that is and maybe give our audience some general timelines that they can expect to see based on some maybe the more common factors that a website redesign will deal with?
Sure. Basically, we can kind of break this up into two different levels. It's going to be a very broad range, as Mark alluded to, but you have more of your standard website builds in which a normal timeline can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months. On the other side of that are, those enterprise level websites. When you're considering tons and tons of content, dynamically fed elements, number of pages can be in the thousands. And in those scenarios, you're looking at that 6 months to a year. And, if it's really, really big, that can be 6 months to a year to get kind of to that first iteration or MVP in a very polished form, and then take another year to really cascade all of those new updates down into all of those internal pages. So those are kind of the broad ranges of what you can expect as far as a general timeline, that 3 to 6 up to enterprise level, looking more on that 6 to 12 months there. Now, really breaking down some of the contributing factors there, because that's always the question. Why is it always different? And how do I know which bucket I'm going to fall into? A lot of that has to do with technical requirements. What is this website really trying to do? What are those intricacies that we have to be considering? Are we starting from ground zero, or are we just fine-tuning some of those pieces and really doing that facelift on the design side and accounting for all of the user experience to make sure that we're up to snuff with all the standards of today? A big thing that plays into those integrations, API development, database development, different things like that. So that's going to be a high contributor to how long this process will take, and just allotting for some of those unknowns and testing and different things like that. Now, on the design side, we have to look at things on how big of a change are we making. Is this something that's very rigid due to brand guidelines, which we'll kind of cover further down into the conversation, but is it more just applying a design, or are we going to go on this big exploration of reinventing our brand? And in those cases, we have to take into consideration iteration and revision cycles and buy-in from numerous key decision makers and things like that. So those are kind of the two buckets. If you're going to do more design exploration and real reinvention of your brand, start to pad those weeks and months on there, as well as sophistication on the development side. That also will start to broaden that range of how long it's going to take. As far as budget goes, well, I guess we can cover that in two separate things. We'll stick to timeline for now.
Yeah, that definitely. And when it comes to certain parts of a website redesign process, the time allotted to complete the work, it can't easily be reduced, right? You hear the phrase, it takes what it takes in terms of getting it done. I'm thinking about things like development and the integration side. But, for the people out there who maybe do have a short timeline that they're really trying to work within, where in the redesign timeline can clients have a positive effect on shortening it, and how?
So that will all come to what preparation have you done? Have you done that proper planning to come to the table with defined objectives and key results, different things like that, those metrics that we're going to be using to create this strategy to reinvent your user experience and do all of those design facelifts. So in that, we basically have two stages that comes before that development. I will reiterate on Mark's side, development is very, very hard to make up time. So it is these first two phases, the discovery phase and the design phase, where we can make that biggest impact in shortening some of those timelines. Within the discovery, as I said, coming to the table with those goals in mind and that clear direction, such that we can hit the ground running and really just do our thing in running our tests and analyzing that data that's available to create the best strategy to move forward. And thinking about that, it really comes down to access. How accessible is your team going to be in that discovery phase so we can iterate quickly and bounce our ideas off of you, instead of you give us a few things, we go back internal, work and tinker and then present something and then go back and do that again. If we have that open line of communication and access to those decision makers and the project leads, we can move through that phase much more quickly. Same goes with the design. Iteration and revisions are the killers of all projects. So being able to really put your concentration hat on, and when we're running exercises such as the spectrum poll, being able to come to a consensus on how we're going to move forward to create this visual language for your company. That's another important part, to not be subjective there. Still taking that objective point of view in the design phase is imperative to making sure us as designers have a clear direction and pathway forward. Funny story with that. We'll dig into horror stories a little bit. One of the biggest things, and this ties into everything we've talked about leading up into this, is understanding who those decision makers are, who needs to be considered. There was a project I worked on where everyone was so excited and we were jamming and designing. We get through not only the homepage, but we've got all these internal pages considered for, and we present them, we're feeling good, and then it gets brought internally, and there was plenty of people that had not been considered or weighed in to that initial exploratory exercise, and we had to start over from scratch. And in those instances, in working fast and not understanding who those key decision makers are, all of a sudden, all that legwork up front to move fast just put us way behind the curve because we had to start from scratch. So just understanding the iteration process and being clear on what you're looking for up front will save you tons of time. Because I can tell you one thing, as a designer, I know it when I see it. That's a phrase I hope I never hear again in my career, although I know I will plenty more times. But you know, that phrase is real. When you're shooting at that moving target, your timeline and budget will just inevitably sprawl.
Yes, I mean, what I'm hearing from you, Ian, is that, you know, doing the work up front to find your stakeholders and then get alignment does wonders in this section here, where you're trying to move quickly. And you can only do that if you have that alignment. You have the right people in the room focused on the right thing, and you have the right people outside of the room doing their parts too, right? So one of the other big things I think is worth highlighting here too is that, you know, things are going to come up of like new ideas that maybe you want to implement, and you know, we call it on our side scope creep, right? Because there's new ideas that we want to try out or we want to add to it. But recognizing that website design and development is an iterative process, and it doesn't have to necessarily all be done in one fell swoop. Being able to put things into kind of like a parking lot of ideas or a V2 list is just as important in these instances.
Yeah, we like to consider some of those things. What is the MVP? Now, that oftentimes is shrinking something down, and maybe it's not a two-step process, but if you take on that mindset of what are must-haves and what are nice-to-haves, that helps you allow the decisions to make those timeline and budget considerations live time during the process, to make sure we can rearrange and reorganize some of our focus without, you know, ultimately having that scope creep, or, you know, having someone be very unhappy with how long those decisions will cascade the timeline.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about timeline. The other big part here is budget, right? So it's obviously a huge part of the planning for a website redesign. Are there any benchmarks that you can share with the group that can help them understand what projects of differing sizes and requirements might cost and why?
Sure. Looking at cost, another big swooping range, but your smaller websites, you're looking at that $50,000 mark. Now your large enterprise level websites can go on up to, you know, $300,000 to get that first iteration out the door and get through the whole project. I know that's a wide range, but basically a lot of the determining factors there that we can really put a magnifying glass on is the information architecture and number of pages of the website. How is this content going to be delivered, and how are we going to basically wrap it all up under one umbrella and then cascade any of those new design changes throughout, thousands to 2,000 pages, which can be a very daunting task there. So those are some of the initial kind of things that we like to look at, as I touched on before, as well as the design and development side of things. How exploratory is this going to be? Do we need to allow 2 to 3 months to go through this design exercise, or is this something we can condense into a 4 to 6 week period and feel really good about moving directly into the development phase? Same thing there. What foundations are we working off of? Are we starting from scratch? What are those integrations and different things like that we have to be considering? All of those things play into that budget and final number there. The thing I like to really talk about there is go into this knowing this is a really big investment. Your website is one of, if not the most important tools that you're going to the public with, and that digital experience is so imperative to your company's health. So take on that notion, knowing that it is an investment and it's going to be a lot of time and potentially a hefty monetary investment there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you like talking about those things here, then I can only imagine how you feel about kind of our last section that we're going to be covering today, right? Which is setting a vision for the aesthetics, right? Making the pretty things. So Ian, talk to me a little bit about why brand guidelines are so important and how they can affect a vision for a website redesign as you get started.
Well, the first question there is, do those brand guidelines actually exist? And in what form do those exist? Brand guidelines can range anywhere from, I have a logo, some colors and type, on up to a full, robust design system and application guide, such that we already know and have all of these assets available to build this digital experience. The big thing there is the brand guidelines for us is our jumping off point. That's what takes a canvas and puts up at least some sort of guardrails for us to start painting on that canvas. Why they're so important is direction and consistency. I want to key in on consistency. Your brand guidelines help us and allow us to make sure that every touch point of the digital experience is the same and what a customer can expect from any physical interaction with your company or print collateral, marketing material, all of those things. So by having that packet that lays out the groundwork for that, we can then ensure that your brand is consistent across that website. And then last but not least, if they don't exist, we've got to account for how are we creating these new assets, who's creating these new assets, and even the ability to create those. We have to be realistic with ourselves. The inevitable inspiration site is always, I want apple.com. Well, if we can't take the same product photography as what Apple can, it's very hard to create those assets. The important thing there is we don't have to sacrifice design. We just have to understand that we can't facilitate maybe that design direction. That in no means has to mean that we're not going to design something beautiful for your company.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that's a really interesting part too to bring up, because it can be really hard to translate, your mental vision and ideas for what a website should look like or could look like, into words that can help other people catch that vision. So what are some things that, the people on this call here can do to document some of those ideas or their vision and allow for that to be a starting point that they can share with other people?
A good jumping off point is looking at your competitors, especially if they're doing certain things very well within your space, going through collecting different visual cues. And this doesn't have to be limited to competitors. What are brands that inspire you as a company and you really resonate with, whether that's their brand message on how they're talking about themselves, or visual assets, or photography usage? Grabbing all of those things and coming prepared to the design phase of that project will only allow us to come together and really find the right pathway forward there. So that's the big thing. Just go look at design and find those inspiration and document those things so that we can then have a discussion around them and help formulate how you want to see your vision brought to life. The other thing I do like to talk about there is we have to talk about the comfort for change. We can say we want to be a disruptor and, say that the banking industry is blue and we want to go red or something like that. It's great to talk about, but what is our true comfort for change, and what are those decision makers' comfort for change? So those things are big things to take in consideration. The last, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No.
Just running on, but I get excited about design. The other big thing that we use as a tool here at Savas is a spectrum pull exercise. Those things are visual cues where we get everybody in the same room and we give you visual cues along with a word association, and then ask you to plot yourself, sometimes on a range of 1 to 10, 1 to 5. But really what that tells us is where do you fall on that line as we go through each one of these steps to understand what that visual language is going to be and how we can create a design system that visually represents how you feel during that exercise. So that's something to look forward to, and it's always a fun meeting to be a part of because you really get to see people's personalities come out and people surprise themselves about how they can speak on design once it's kind of broken down and made much more accessible to them.
Yeah. And I mean, you talk about, people's personality coming out as they start to define or put words to their vision. There's obviously a decent amount of subjectivity that's baked into the aesthetic direction for a website design, right? But can you help me understand what change agents can do to maybe take a more objective approach here? Yeah,
I think one of the big things is we've already discovered or uncovered our metrics and strategy moving forward. So design, like nothing else, can in some essence be measured when you're looking at what is it trying to accomplish. So instead of just asking yourself, is that blue enough or is that green enough, you can say, is this going to move the needle based on our initial strategy? Does that tweak in color really matter when it comes to bottom line results, or is this the correct pathway forward? The other big thing is brand fit and direction. I talked about comfort for change and mentioned that word disruptor. Basically, companies fall into those two buckets. Are you following industry standards and really doubling down, and your differentiator there is that you just do something so much better than someone else, but it is completely aligned with what's happening within the space? And then that disruptor side is you're reinventing that space. You have an innovative new way to go into this space. So maybe your brand needs to reflect that and break those industry norms from a color palette and imagery point of view. So that's a big thing to consider. And all of that falls into brand fit. At the end of the day, let's pull up this design, and is this what our brand is? Is this communicating and giving off that aura of what our brand is? And if not, even if it looks beautiful, it may not be the right path forward because it's just not the correct brand fit there. With that being said, all of that influences timeline and budget. So that can also be something that keeps it more objective. In going through this and saying that I'll know it when I see it, that takes time and that takes more money. So if that's the thing, you can always rely on timeline and budget to help bring people back in from that subjective side.
Yeah. Well, speaking of timeline, that is the core of what we were looking to cover here today. Ian, thank you so much for sharing all of your experience, all of the things that you've learned throughout your entire career up until this point. I do want to take a step back here and let the audience throw any questions that they have into the chat, the Q&A section. We did have a couple that were submitted beforehand as well that we can get started on while other people maybe get typing. So this one comes from Stephen Carter. He says, I have a boss who's very budget conscious and oftentimes underestimates the cost of digital efforts, like a redesign. What advice would you give me to help get her to understand and approve a full budget for a redesign?
Sure. The biggest thing is understanding this is an investment. As I alluded to earlier in the conversation, your website is one of or the most important resources you have as a company to reach your users and make sure that engagement is there and your brand message and product and services are showcased in the best way. So starting there with just the overall importance and meaning behind making sure you're putting your best foot forward on your website is a good start. And then also just looking at, there's ways to cater your timeline and budget. Do we need all the bells and whistles? Are there ways in which we really need to address problem A, but problem B and C can definitely wait? So let's break that up into a phased approach. Or if that is just, the only focus for this current year, let's go attack that problem and make sure that we can fit and right size that timeline and budget to your own needs there.
Yeah, let's see. Jonas has a question here. They ask, what does it mean to you when you hear make the website scalable?
Scalability is a big thing. I look at that in two different parts. The first one being, how do we as agency partners and an extension of your team not handcuff you to ourselves? So once that launch is done and the website is live to the world, how can you make sure that the company that hired us can continue to generate content and create more premium content and things like that without having to call us? The other side of scalability really comes into play when we're thinking about the actual content on the page. When designing, scalable design has to be flexible. And that's what I see that scalability as well is. There's different use cases that may need to use the same template, but have varying degrees of content lengths or ways that it needs to display that content. So is this design flexible if I have 3 bullet points versus 2 long paragraphs? So I think those are the two big things. Scalable as in adding new content to the website in number of pages and how you're delivering it, as well as how does the design scale based on what you put into it?
And I think too, if I can add one more element to that, outside of just design, taking a look at the system that you're choosing, right? The CMS that you're choosing definitely helps you when it comes to scaling in the future, right? If you know that you're going to potentially need to integrate with things as you grow and as you scale, whether that's bringing in marketing automation, sales automation, things like that, all of that is really important in that initial decision, because that helps you make those additions to the back end or any of that functionality available to you later. Okay, I got maybe one last question I can give to you here, Ian. What are your thoughts on this concept of growth-driven design? Stephen Carter wants to know.
Sure, growth-driven design. Really what I look at there is, what is the strategy behind the design? And how can you prove that design does have a return on investment? It's always hard to pin a number around design aesthetic, but if you do have a very clear objective or metric that you're shooting for at the onset of the project, you can clearly show that your user journey and identification of buyer personas and things like that works into the overall design and flow of the website to ensure that design is facilitating growth of your company and conversion to make sure that, you know, the right audience is being delivered the correct type of content, and then allowing them to convert when it makes sense for them. So that could be a motivated buyer versus a self-educator turned into a potential lead. So that's what I think of growth-driven design is understanding the user experience and allowing design to be a tool to facilitate and measure against those metrics that you create at the beginning of the project.
Perfect. Well, that wraps up everything for here today. I do want to say for anybody who is still on the call, who is thinking about taking on a website redesign in this upcoming year, it always starts with discovery. A lot of what we talked about here today are things that we do in discovery sessions with our clients, whether that's just stakeholder interviews to understand who we'll be working with, to doing those spectrum polling and mood board builds to really nail down like the design direction that we're going to take. So I would tell anybody here, if you are looking for a partner, we are more than happy to be able to sit down and understand what you're looking to achieve and get started in that discovery session here today. But looking forward, I just want to say thank you so much. We are looking for some feedback on today's session. So we're going to send out a survey both here right now, as well as in a follow-up email later on. We'd love to hear what you thought about the topic, about the approach, everything like that, so that we can make sure that any content that we create moving forward helps people achieve what they're looking to do. And with that, thank you so much. We will be sending out the recording of this later on as it comes through, and we'll be sharing a few other additional resources. So thanks again for joining, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.